There is one main issue that I've come here to address the public through you here this afternoon. You all would recall that the construction of the highway, the extension of the highway from San Fernando to Point Fortin, has been something that has been a lot of focus for the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago from certain aspects. When we came in, one of the things we had to do was protect the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago initially, because the contractor that was supposed to be constructing the highway, OAS, a Brazilian firm that had gone into judicial management in March of 2015, when we came in, they had actually abandoned the contract and terminated the contract sometime thereafter. One of the first things we had to do to protect the taxpayers is go and seek to recover about $1 billion worth of bonds and letters of credit, all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom in some instances. Another area that has come under scrutiny is the acquisition of land. And the Minister of Works and Transport and the Ministry of Works and Transport did an investigation, a preliminary investigation, and they came to Cabinet a few months ago with a report. And it was a report that concerned us very greatly at Cabinet, and we deliberated on it and we asked for presentations to be done, because what we found in that report, or the findings that came forward from the Ministry of Works, concerned us tremendously. What we found is that the acquisition of land was initially $800 million set aside for the acquisition of land for this extension of the highway from San Fernando to Point Fortin, $800 million. And we found that over $500 million, $500 million of taxpayers' money was expended on the acquisition of parcels of land. And some of the parcels of land, it turned out, were not even necessary for the construction of this highway extension. So after the expenditure of over $500 million, there was just under $300 million left to be expended. When the Ministry of Works and NIDCO did an analysis, they found that with the rerouting of the highway, lands that were acquired and paid for in some instances, lands that were acquired and not yet paid for in other instances, fell to the wayside. And then there was also land to be acquired that was now going to exceed, in the estimations, the potential to exceed over $300 million of that leftover money from the $800 million. So the Ministry of Works did an extensive study of all of the documentation that they could find in relation to this land acquisition. And as the Ministry of Works began this exercise, a number of instances of concern came to our attention. For example, we found that where there were valuations of land for certain lower amounts, all of a sudden a valuation was then done for much higher amounts. And then when it came to the acquisition of the land, yet again, there was even a further increase in the value being paid for those parcels of land. We then found as well that some persons were paid significant sums of money, tens of millions of dollars, for the acquisition of land that was no longer necessary, and they now made claims against the state for the payment of further what we deem to be overvaluation of the land. So the Ministry of Works was tasked to do an in-depth study into this, and that has been completed. Today, the Cabinet has taken a decision based on these findings and what was brought to the Cabinet and the concerns surrounding the acquisition of these parcels of land. The Cabinet has taken a decision today to appoint a Commission of Enquiry to look into this, and I'll soon get to the terms of reference of this Commission of Enquiry that the Cabinet has today approved in an effort to find out what really went on with the acquisition of these parcels of land and how over $500 million, $500 million could have been spent of taxpayers' money for the acquisition of land, and they're not even near to being nearly completed in the amount of land that needs to be acquired. So what I can tell you all is the Commission of Enquiry is going to be chaired by former Justice Ventour, Sebastian Ventour. He is going to be assisted by Commissioner Gregory Delzin. The counsel to the Commission initially appointed Senior Counsel Reginald Armour, assisted by 2 junior counsel, Venessa, Gopaul, and Mr. Rishi. So the Commission of Enquiry, and I'll get into the terms of reference, is going to be Justice Sebastian Ventour, as well as Mr. Gregory Delzin, supported by counsel to the Commission of Mr. Reginald Armour, Senior Counsel, Ms. Venessa Gopaul, and Mr. Rishi. Some of the things that were found that are of concern is we found that in 2011, the Cabinet established a ministerial oversight committee for the construction of this highway extension. And the composition of this ministerial oversight committee was chaired by the Prime Minister. And it had a number of other senior ministers who formed part of this committee. What concerned us was the Ministerial Oversight Committee, so it was chaired by the then Prime Minister. The Ministerial Oversight Committee was mandated to act as a policy guidance mechanism for the implementation of the San Fernando extension project, to provide advice as required to the Cabinet on key areas of decision-making and to review the project as it progressed. This Ministerial Oversight Committee was also to act as a mechanism to ensure that all approvals were efficiently obtained to allow for adherence to the project timelines and the quality standards. They were also to oversee the implementation of the project in relation to funding, quality metrics, and time. They were also to spearhead the public outreach aspect of the project to ensure that the general public is kept informed as to the implications, impacts, and benefits of the project to the country as a whole, to do the community outreach program and the management of impacts to the affected stakeholders. This Ministerial Oversight Committee was also to ensure that the proper monitoring and evaluation was undertaken and that the country received value for money output. So one of the express, in writing, black and white, mandates of this ministerial committee, led by the then Prime Minister with a number of senior ministers, was that they would ensure, on behalf of us, the taxpayers, that a proper monitoring and evaluation was undertaken and that the country received value for money output, that the local construction industry benefited from the implementation of the project, and there was a transfer of knowledge to the extent possible in the implementation of the project. On that second limb, of course, we all know now that the contractor was a Brazilian contracting firm, OAS, that went into judicial management, basically in layman's terms, bankruptcy. And there was not a local contractor doing this work. And then, most importantly, or equally importantly, to establish guidelines for the relocation and compensation of affected persons. And that this interagency committee would be established for the purpose of reviewing the recommendations of private valuers before submitting same to the NIDCO's tender committee. So what we saw here is that a cabinet-appointed ministerial oversight committee was going to get the valuation reports from private valuers even before those reports were sent to the implementation state agency, NIDCO, and they would decide themselves whether the right values or value for money according to their mandate for taxpayers was actually being implemented in the acquisition of land. So they wanted the valuations to come to them first before land was eventually acquired. What we have found now is that over 513 properties were acquired and paid for by the state for that $500 million that I've referred to. There's still 495 properties that are required. There's a requirement for us to acquire. That is for the state to acquire. And then 291 properties which were served with land acquisition notices are no longer required due to design changes in the highway. And there now needs to be decisions as to what happens with that. But the Commission of Enquiry, when we saw some of the examples of what took place and some of the litigation that us, the taxpayers, are now subject to, and the type of behavior that we saw, there was a particular public servant who went out and did valuations in his private capacity, and then lo and behold, when the valuations now need to be approved by the Commissioner of Valuations Department, that same person came and actually increased, in some instances, the valuation that he had provided as a private valuator, now increased it and burdened us, the taxpayers, with unjustifiable, according to the preliminary advice we received, unjustifiable values for the acquisition of certain land. So what we did to protect the taxpayers is we put a pause on the payment of any further monies for the acquisition of land, and we had asked the Ministry of Works and Transport to put together a technical team to bring a report to us. And it is when we studied that report is what then provoked the Cabinet to say, look, we need to have a commission of inquiry to get to the true facts in the public glare as to what it is took place here for the expenditure of taxpayers' funds of over $500 million, $500 million expended on behalf of taxpayers. And in many instances, the properties were not necessary, and worse yet, in some instances, great overvalues were paid for these properties that we believe was unjustifiable. The terms of reference of the Commission of Enquiry, which is being appointed under the Commission of Enquiries Act, Chapter 1901, is to inquire into the actions of and on behalf of the state in acquiring and taking steps to acquire properties and structures in respect of the construction of the extension of the Solomon Hochoy Highway extension to Point Fortin, to inquire into whether that Cabinet-appointed Ministerial Oversight Committee fulfilled its mandate, to inquire into the decisions of NIDCO, to inquire, and I'm paraphrasing some of it, to inquire into the circumstances which resulted in the state either acquiring or having taken steps to acquire properties that are no longer required for the construction of this project. The compensation or non-compensation of persons who were served land acquisition notices and orders and or who incurred expenses in submitting claims for compensation and or whose properties are no longer required for the construction of this project. The process which was utilized by the state and or NIDCO for approving the payment of compensation to persons affected by the land acquisition process for this project. The process utilized by NIDCO and the Office of the Commissioner of State Lands for the allocation of lands to persons affected by the land acquisition process. The process utilized by the state and or NIDCO or the Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation for the relocation of persons, including elderly sick persons who were affected by the land acquisition process for the project. There were also instances that the Ministry of Works found and brought to us as a cabinet that showed in one household, for example, there are 4 persons, and each of the 4 people in that household were compensated for the same land acquisition and relocation. So whereas one person or the household alone should have been compensated, each of the individuals in the household were compensated. Of course, remembering that the mandate of that Ministerial Oversight Committee, according to themselves, appointing themselves, was that they must ensure that the taxpayer gets value for money, and any private valuation done must get past them as a committee first before it goes on to the public servants and the technocrats. The Commission of Enquiry will also look into whether persons who are allocated state lands and or housing units from the HDC arising out of the land acquisition for the project were eligible to receive same in accordance with the Cabinet-appointed compensation policy, whether NIDCO and the Commissioner of State Lands exercised due diligence in the allocation of state lands and or housing units from the HDC, whether and what payments were made by persons in consideration of their being allocated state lands and or housing units from the Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation under the Cabinet-appointed compensation policy. That specific term of reference, of course, is there may be instances where persons were compensated for their land and their house being acquired, paid a value for their land and house, which should be, of course, for them now to go and move themselves on and to acquire new property or a new house. In addition to that, they may have then been provided with more outside of the normal allocation type policies. Whether the Commission of Enquiry will also inquire into whether there were any conflicts of interest or other elements of impropriety on part of the officials of the Valuation Division of the Ministry of Finance involved in the assessment of compensation for any of the properties which were subject to the land acquisition process, and if so, the circumstances giving rise to same and the manner in which they were handled and or addressed. The circumstances leading to legal claims being filed against the state. There are currently legal claims filed against the state. Some of the persons actually received significant amounts of compensation. In one instance, there was an individual who received over $50 million already for the land that was acquired from him, and that land is no longer necessary and is now making a claim for over $30 million additional dollars. The Commission of Enquiry will also inquire into whether there was an appropriate compensation policy in place on the 4th of March 2011 when NIDCO engaged the design build contractor, OAS, to complete design and construction works. The facts and circumstances surrounding the compensation policy, which was in fact adopted by the state for the acquisition of land for the construction of the project. I should mention as well, what we found is that the Ministerial Committee recommended, and it was accepted, that a number of private entities, some law firms, some lawyers, be utilized to go out and negotiate the prices and the acquisition cost with the various the landowners, as well as to provide valuations. And the amount of money that was paid to these people appears, in our view, to be excessive for the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. They will also inquire into the facts and circumstances surrounding the hiring by NIDCO of private attorneys, negotiating consultants, and valuers by NIDCO to assist in its management of this land acquisition process. They will also inquire into whether the board of NIDCO and or the executive management of NIDCO fulfilled and complied with the responsibilities and duties imposed upon them by law and by good corporate governance and practice in managing the land acquisition portfolio. And lastly, that they will identify officials, if any, who have failed in their duties, or such other persons whose conduct may have been against the best interest of the state in the land acquisition process. And finally, we are asking the Commission of Enquiry to make such findings, observations, recommendations arising out of their deliberations as may be appropriate in relation to 1, whether there has been any breach of duty by persons or entities. 2, whether there are any grounds for any criminal or civil proceedings to be initiated against any persons or entities. 3, whether criminal proceedings should be recommended to the Director of Public Prosecutions for his consideration. 4, whether civil proceedings should be recommended to the Attorney General for his consideration. 5, the appropriate best practice to be utilized by the state for the acquisition of land required for public purposes. Because this Cabinet feels strongly that the Commission of Enquiry must recommend a process that can then be utilized as the standard for going forward in the future to make sure, as best as we can, that taxpayers are never again subjected to this wanton abuse of office, as well as the fact that lands were acquired that were not necessary, or worse yet, lands were acquired that were not necessary at greatly inflated prices. And lastly, what we're asking them to do when they make their findings is to provide any other recommendations that may be deemed necessary in the circumstances. So, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, the Cabinet has today, after very considered deliberations and very careful deliberations and discussions, and after studying very carefully a well-written report of preliminary findings by the Ministry of Works and Transport, we've taken the decision to appoint a Commission of Enquiry that will be led by the Honorable Justice Sebastian Ventour, assisted by Mr. Gregory Delzin, along with counsel. They'll be supported by counsel Mr. Reginald Armour, Senior Counsel, Ms. Venessa Gopaul, and Mr. Rishi. Thank you. I'll take questions. At this stage, what you normally do with a Commission of Enquiry of this nature is you allow them to peruse initially the documentation and work out. They will have to work out their process, their procedures, their public hearings, etc. So it's premature at this stage to say how long the Commission of Enquiry will take to do that. We would expect them to take a look at the documentation, get a better understanding. They've only just been appointed, and to tell us then, the government, through the Attorney General, what is their proposed time frame.
How is this now coming to light? When was the investigation started at the Ministry of Works? Because you could have the argument that Commission of Enquiry will do nothing but just unearth dirt before a general election. So the timing is a bit suspicious 4 years in.
What this is about is, as you all know, when we came in, as I said at the outset, the first thing we had to do is regain possession of the site and go through recovering the money from bonds, etc. You know, we've also been going through competitive tender processes to award contracts and specific contracts for different states of the highway. So in carrying out that work, the Ministry of Works then came to us and said, well, look, there's land that we need to acquire. So we said, okay, well, go away and study what land it is, come back and tell us. And that is when this started to be unearthed. So it is not that there was any delay in doing it, etc. And we feel strongly that the taxpayers need to know.
Come and say, look, there are some discrepancies here, we're seeing some red flags.
I'll tell you the date of the report. The date of the report is the 7th of July 2019. And it's a substantial report. And you have to understand, as I said, there were over 500 properties acquired. So they had to go through that. There was some difficulties, my understanding, in finding all of the documentation. Persons who were there at the time are no longer there. So they had to do that first and bring that to us. Well, they would have started as they began the process of awarding the contracts and going through the process of getting the work done.
What year are we looking at then?
I can't tell you what year we're looking at, etc. I've tried to outline as best, and you all have been informed that every step of the way, what we've been doing with this extension from San Fernando to Point Fortin Highway.
The argument another Commission of Enquiry, people tend to say that does nothing but put money in lawyers' pockets. That all they could do is make recommendations, and then everything moves on. It isn't really protecting taxpayers down to.
Well, I think the taxpayers in this instance, certainly I as a taxpayer, believe that we need to know what it is that happened. That is what a Commission of Enquiry is for. I personally have been counsel in several Commission of Enquiries in Trinidad and Tobago, and they do play the very important role of letting persons, the public, the man and woman in the public, know what it is that went on. Also, persons who may be accused of something or some wrongdoing have the opportunity to come and defend themselves and say, no, that has been your perception of what it is, but this is actually why I say this is the reality, etc. So we don't think that this is something that should just be brushed aside and say, well, it's just another Commission of Enquiry. We felt strongly enough as a cabinet that this is the decision to take.
Who are the other members of the ministerial committee that you referred to? You said it was chaired by the then Prime Minister.
I'm sure that you all would be able to find out who the other members of the ministerial committee were. I can give you... Well, and that is why, correct. So it was done in August 11th, 2011. August 11, 2011, you had the Prime Minister. You then had the Minister of Trade and Industry, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Housing and Environment, and six other ministers. It was a ministerial committee of 10. Afternoon, and actually when the terms of reference are published, it will be there in the terms of reference.
So you can't give us this because there's a lot of work to do now to figure out who was at that point.
Is it that the media doesn't want to do some work?
You have the document.
The Minister of Finance, the Minister of Housing and Environment, the Minister of Local Government, the Minister of Works and Transport, the Minister of Public Utilities, the Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs, the Minister of Planning and Economy, and the Minister of State in the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure. Yes, Mr. Tiwari.
Minister, good afternoon again. Is there any estimated cost to this Commission of Enquiry? Because you know that they are substantial costs, so I guess that's where Akash's question came in, the cost versus the actual benefit.
Well, I'm sure that Mr. Samru could ask his questions himself, but to answer your question, at this stage the answer is no, there's no estimated cost. The first thing that needs to happen is you appoint a commission. You then ask the commissioners and their council to take a look at it. They will then, I assume, come back to the Attorney General with, look, these are the types of resources that are necessary, this is the estimated length of time, and this type of thing. These things evolve.
Made references to someone who went in and valued privately initially, and then went in as a member of the valuation.
He was a member of the Commission of Valuations Office, which is a division in the Ministry of Finance, a public servant. He was on leave. Whilst he was on leave, he did private valuations, came back off of leave, then found himself in the position of acting Commissioner of Valuations, and then the rest is history. And that will all come out in the Commission of Enquiry.
Still on the job?
No, he's not.
Well, I was about to ask, there seems as though you have information before you that is actionable. Has any action commenced against some of the discrepancies that you would have found?
My understanding is that the Ministry of Finance level, when this was discovered, they may have commenced an investigation or asked, I can't remember the exact details now, asked the Public Service Commission to commence an investigation. But again, we felt because of the amount that is captured here, on so many properties, the best way to have this done is via a Commission of Enquiry. And a Commission of Enquiry really is to go in and do a fact-finding exercise and provide recommendations.
Is he no longer on the job because he resigned or he left or what?
My understanding is he took early retirement or resigned very recently.
Minister Julian, from Newsday,
Yes,
you mentioned there are a number of legal claims coming out for this matter.
Correct.
Do you have a quantum, how many claims, how many figures, total we're looking at?
I don't have that information readily available. I was trying to find the section that had it. So no, unfortunately, I don't have that. And I think what had come to us, okay, here it is. What had come to us is a sampling of the claims. So legal claims arising. You have one claim, a High Court claim, for $92.4 million. The second one, another High Court claim, $5.4 million. The third one, at the time of filing the claim in 2018, $116.2 million, and claiming a daily rate of interest, etc., at $21,200. The fourth claim that was brought to us, as an example, was $2.5 million. The fifth claim, $720,000. The sixth claim, $1.2 million. The seventh claim, $3.6 million. The eighth claim, $4 million. The ninth claim, $50.9, so $51 million. And the 10th claim, $6 million. And then a number of pre-action protocol letters. So when we saw these things cascading, and that's when the Ministry of Works had come and we said, look, go away and let's look into this. And when the Ministry of Works came in July of this year with their report, we've been studying it since then. And that's why we take this decision now.
So those are from people who got notices?
Could be people who have got, yes. So some people, I assume, I don't have all of those facts, but yes, they would have commenced the land acquisition. So they may have received notices. It may have not been fully consummated. They wouldn't have got the full sums that they think they're entitled to. But even in the acquisition of land by the state, compulsory acquisition, it is a process that takes place. You serve the notice, and then, as you know, it's a number of steps that take place after that.
Do you have an approximate report, give an approximate figure of the quantum of the overvaluation that, a global figure?
No, it did not. So those are all of the things. So when it came to us as a cabinet, and we said, look, that needs to be done. These are the questions that need to be answered. We figured, look, let us have a Commission of Enquiry to look into all of those things and have the evidence brought. Because in the meantime, we need to get on with the governance of the country. Minister of Works and Transport needs to get on with the finishing of the highway. Yes.
You said 495 average properties still to be acquired.
Correct.
Do you have a cost for that?
No, we don't. So what we've also asked the Ministry of Works, and we expect them to come within the next couple of weeks now, is we outlined to the Ministry of Works a process of how they should go about acquiring the rest of the land, and they need to now prioritize and come to the Cabinet and say these are the parcels that now need to be acquired, and have in place a proper procedure for the valuation and acquisition of that land, as they have been utilizing with a number of other ongoing projects.
A lot of information from the report, and just piggybacking off of Rishi's question here, do we really need to go to the Commission of Enquiry? Do we have enough evidence?
Obviously, we believe that we need to go to the Commission of Enquiry. This is preliminary. We haven't called in people to hear what's their side of the story. You're looking at documents, and documents only tell a part of the story.
Inquiry actually having a conclusion.
Do you think that there is, to piggyback off of his question, that there is a Commission of Enquiry fatigue, given the fact that we're still waiting for the CLICO Commission of Enquiry, which costs so much money, it's like over 100 million, and we have nothing from that yet. We had the Las Alturas Commission of Enquiry.
Okay, so those two commissions of inquiry, no, the answer is, I mean, at the end of the day, Commission of Enquiry fatigue is a subjective point of view. Obviously, the Cabinet didn't feel so, otherwise they would not have taken this important decision. The CLICO Commission of Enquiry, the report was completed, and as you all are aware, the Prime Minister was in writing told by the Director of Public Prosecutions there are ongoing criminal investigations. That report should not be made public. The Prime Minister delivered the report to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who is in charge of criminal charges and criminal proceedings. So that's where that ended up. The Las Alturas, last I was aware, was challenged by a number of persons whose names were pinpointed in the Commission of Enquiry, and that's currently, I'm no longer in legal practice, but that's currently somewhere in the court system. There were commissions of inquiry before that. The Off Commission, well, it depends on how you look at it. The facts came out, I'm sure at the time, whilst these commissions of inquiry were going on, I certainly, having participated in the CLICO and HCU one, at the time, everyone in the country, a lot of people were anxious and looking on and following it on a daily basis. I think taxpayers must have that opportunity in this instance.
These issues, do we have an idea of how far this project has now been delayed?
The project should not be delayed at all. That is one of the reasons why we decided to go with a Commission of Enquiry rather than have the AG's office and the Ministry of Works and Transport tying up their personnel in trying to find the facts around this. Hand it to a separate body. That's the purpose of a Commission of Enquiry. The Minister of Works and Transport continues to press ahead to complete the highway.
So this will not affect the
This
project?
will not affect it, no.
And what about in terms of, because I mean, there was supposed to be financing, there was supposed to be properties acquired. Is there an issue of now where we have to go and find additional financing?
Again, those are what we've told the Ministry of Works and Transport is they have to come back to Cabinet with these are the properties that actually still need to be acquired, and then a proper valuation of those properties will be done, proper acquisition process. So at this stage, I can't say what that cost will be and where the money will come from.
I anticipate a lot of court action before this Commission of Enquiry even gets off the ground.
So be it.
That's the nature of...
I can't remember a single Commission of Enquiry that I was engaged in where there was action prior to the Commission of Enquiry trying to stop it. So that will be interesting. Maybe some of the names called pique your interest and you think that's their modus operandi, but none of them. Yes, he did try to stop the Parliament and did not succeed.
On another topic, there's currently a hunt for some detainees of IDC. Could you give us afford us any update on that?
Correct. As you all are aware, we don't have our mobile devices inside of Cabinet. I came straight from the Cabinet room into this post-Cabinet briefing, so I don't have an update. In my conversations this last night, I had asked for a written report to be provided to me this morning. Up to going into Cabinet, I hadn't received it. But in my conversations with the acting chief immigration officer as well as the police authorities, because we do have an active manhunt out, I saw that you all did get the photographs. We asked last night that they be published so people are aware. 2 of them up to before me going into cabinet were back in custody. I'm not sure whether anything further has been there, but I can tell you I did ask our services to put as much resources as we can at this stage, and we are going to find these people.
What about the security at the IDC in the meantime?
Again, I had done a tour of the IDC recently, so last night I gave instructions to the Chief Immigration Officer as well as the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of National Security for 2 immediate steps to be taken, and I've asked them to do it immediately, as soon as possible, immediately, that should make it a more secure environment.
Is there any concern about, we have the IDC, we have the breakout from remand as well. Is there a concern as National Security Minister of all these escapes and breakouts and something more needs to be done?
The answer is yes. The answer is, as the Minister of National Security, that is one of the conversations that is an ongoing conversation. Again, with the Golden Grove Aruka facilities, certain instructions have been given as to how they should make the facilities more secure. In fact, it gets me quite angry, I will admit, that when you go up to the maximum security prison, you see this massive fence, 2 stages of fence built with absolutely, they're not fencing off anything. There's no building or anything in between. And that fence cost $80 million. So I told them, well, if $80 million could have been spent, unfortunately, we don't have that type of money now, then let us get that fencing done where that fencing needs to be done.
Minister, updates on the actual registration cards for the Venezuelans who were registered. When will they be getting that?
The registration cards were in the process. We procured, in the process of procuring the machine, because I wanted us to be able to do it ourselves for security reasons. The cards are finalized, meaning the design of the cards, etc. As we told everyone when we began the process, there is a due diligence that is taking place, and that is continuing. It's almost complete. And I've asked that these cards, we will start printing these cards and distributing them in the next couple of weeks.
And we were talking about IDC. What about the process of some of them being included? Some people call it an amnesty. Whatever happened with that process?
All of those, you mean during the registration process, the people in the IDC, whether they were afforded the opportunity to register and then to be let out? The answer is yes. Everyone who was qualified to be registered, so meaning that they weren't in the IDC for some criminal act apart from overstay of their visit, they were allowed to be registered and released.
Do you recall how many?
No, I can't.
The Prime Minister would...
Africans and in CARICOM.
No, this is dealing with the Venezuelan registration process. Again, there are very few, and I don't have the exact figures here now. There were very few Africans. I think the figure was 7. I think 1 had been released, and I think the Ghanaian may have been released, but don't hold me to that. And then there were only a couple from the CARICOM as well. What is going to happen in a conversation I was having with the chairman of the National Security Council, been given the green light that once none of them are in there for any criminal activity, I'll be granting them ministerial permits and allowing them for the period of 1 year for them to come out and do what they need to do in accordance with the law.
So, Rashad Khan, Guardian Media. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister stated that any Venezuelan national caught here without their documentation would be immediately deported. Now, I understand that you all would have been back-checking with Interpol and stuff from the persons who would have been registered. Can you give us a figure of how many, if any, deportation orders were signed as yet?
I don't have the exact figure, but I have been signing deportation orders on an almost daily basis.
What's a ballpark idea?
I don't want to give a ballpark figure.
Continue. And we know the process has, since that registration process was closed off, now when they have to apply for the visa and so forth. How has that process been going? Have Venezuelans been availing of themselves? Has been issues with the process?
The visa system is not a new system to the immigration of Trinidad and Tobago. What was new is us now implementing the necessity for visas for Venezuelans to have visas sent to Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, the process has been ongoing. Persons have been applying for visas. Some people have been getting visas. As the Prime Minister said quite interestingly, we as a people know how to apply for visas, and we know how to find ourselves, for example, at Marley Street. And it is a very similar process. We also have these visa applications online. They're processed at headquarters here in Port of Spain, and that's where the decisions are taken as to who should be allowed entry or not.
A quantum of
No, I don't have the quantum.
Minister, we've noticed that the TTPS, they've been doing some raids recently of entertainment establishments, I think over the weekend.
What do you call them?
Entertainment establishments. For want of a better word, right? I don't know if to describe them as a bar, brothel, I don't know.
This isn't disrepute.
I'm not going to. But in any event, I think 11 or 12 women were held over the weekend, right? I noticed some of them were Venezuelan and there were one or two, I think there was a Grenadian, Nepalese,
etc.
But in the article that I read, it said that the Venezuelans were detained, but the other nationals were arrested. Are you aware of that? Is that a fact?
Actually, at my heads of security meeting yesterday or day before, these are one of the things that came up. So no, I am not aware of any detention versus arrest, etc. I don't know whose article that was you're reading. I know very frequently people, those words have completely different meanings and they may not understand and appreciate the use of the word in certain circumstances. So no, my understanding is went in, there was a successful raid of one of these establishments and certain persons were picked up, and of course there's then a process. So for example, in my meeting this week, I had the head of the counter-trafficking unit, and what we're doing is we're working out, because I'll tell you all something. I have given the mandate to our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service counter-trafficking immigration with the support of intelligence and the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force. We are not going to tolerate this illegality here in Trinidad. And it is not about focusing and picking up these women, although when we do, we will. We are going after the ones who are in charge of these institutions and making a life out of crime and taking advantage of people in circumstances. That's where our focus is, and we're in the process of doing that.
In that same vein, can you give us an update on, I think the TTPS and National Security was supposed to establish this ICE type?
Correct. So that was the discussion. So again, that is the policy. We're going to have, exactly as you say, an ICE type unit. So in the discussions this week, I've told them I am ready to implement. So I want from immigration, from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, persons who are going to be dedicated to this unit, and they are going to be vetted. Because we have had instances where we're planning certain raids at these establishments, and we all know that these establishments every night are very busy, and on the nights that the raids took place, no one is there. That's not a coincidence.
For it to be fully implemented or not?
I want it implemented, so I've asked them at this week's meeting to identify the personnel who are going to be part of this. So I am hoping that within the week or the next couple of weeks, we'll have those personnel.
Do you know how many you're looking for? How many agents or officers?
At the end of the day, I leave those logistics and operational issues up to them. They know what it is that we, the government, want to achieve, how we want to fight this area of crime, and they will decide how they man it. I don't get into, well, you need 10 officers here or 9 officers there.
I suppose it's connected to the same events at IDC, because if we have this ICE unit implemented and we're detaining more persons, we have to have facilities and secure as well, you know.
Early next week, you all will see, I am going to tour on Monday the Eastern Correctional Facility. It has been prepared to be a second IDC. I have signed the paperwork and declared it a second IDC, so I'm going myself there personally on Monday just to make sure that it is what it should be. And then thereafter, we would have increased the capacity of the 2 IDCs by 100%. So now we'll be able to, the current one is 150. This one is also going to be 150. And what I'm going to do is we're going to separate the men and the women. So the current IDC in a repo is going to be for females, and the other one, the Eastern Correctional Facility, is going to be for males.
And how are we dealing with children? Especially, I know
again, the Child Protection Unit, the Children's Authority, they are part of that conversation, and we are guided by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to children, how we deal with the children. But I have asked the officers to be as humane as possible and to ensure that we do the right thing. In some of my tours, for example, I remember before the registration process down at the Cedros Port and going up to the Cedros Police Station, seeing a young mother there with 2 babies, literal babies, and I'm glad she was not in a cell, and then we dealt with them accordingly. So the officers will continue as best as they can, once the public's interest and safety isn't compromised, to make sure that they do what needs to be done. But remember, these IDCs, I don't intend for these IDCs to be indefinite holding bays. That is a step towards deportation and removal from Trinidad and Tobago.
I was asking about facilities for children. Is there a need for more facilities for children?
For children, meaning now what? Which children are you talking about?
Like,
Anyone?
let's just say there's a child is here illegally or with parents.
And when you say children, I mean a child is a minor. So anyone under the age of 16. So are you talking about a 15-year-old? Are you talking about a 10-year-old or 8-year-old? The answer is it will be dealt with on a step-by-step circumstance, a case. But I'm glad you reminded me of that. Another decision that Cabinet took today, and I'm glad my Cabinet colleagues, including the Prime Minister, supported and approved straight away, is I've gotten permission up at the prison facilities. You all would have heard me speak about a structure that exists, and I wanted to complete this structure for a female juvenile facility to house the female minors who breach the law and are ordered by the courts to be not imprisoned but confined. I got the permission of Cabinet today to go ahead with that project. We're looking to do it at under $4 million, utilizing prison labor, etc. And I'm going to be pushing to complete that as soon as possible, because the female minors that are being picked up and ordered by the criminal courts and the child courts to be incarcerated, the facilities aren't sufficient, and this is going to help bolster that. All right?
Children and parents that we pick up, so
That I'm not sure about. I don't want to speculate. I think not, but I'm not going to speculate.
There has been earlier this morning a prominent media person who was influential in the in Urapun Gardens, with HEC coming and cracking down on illegal vending and businesses and activities in the area, said that she had her life threatened. Are you aware of this?
I am aware of it, and actually before going into Cabinet, I sent a message to the Commissioner of Police providing that information when it came to me and asking him to do the necessary. The police know what they need to do. So we are addressing that situation. Ms. Holder. Okay? Yes, time for one more.
Did the issue of Ms. Campbell, the tourism organization, did that come up at Cabinet today?
It did not come up in any detail, no.
But it came up at all?
Well, the passing comment or question came up as to what is going on, but the Minister of Tourism has spoken about that extensively. That is under his mandate, and he will deal with that when the time is necessary, I assume. But we didn't get into any detail at all, on any detailed discussions on it. So there's nothing to report. Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time here this afternoon as usual.